Thank you everyone for attending our session today on finding and evaluating open educational resources. The concept of OERs has never been more important than now with the global pandemic, the need for teaching online, and I'm sure the frustration that many of you are feeling since some of the resources you've used in the past pose major accessibility issues. Today, we'll be going over some concepts and tools to help you find other options available to you and considerations you may want to make when choosing an OER. I'm Stephanie Barrett, one of the social sciences librarians at River Campus Libraries at the University of Rochester, and I'll be leading the session with my co-instructor, Eileen.
Hi, I'm Eileen Daly-Bellis. I'm also a social science librarian, and I also work with the philosophy department here at the University of Rochester.
Hi, I'm Pauline Schwartzman. I'm going to be the moderator. I'm a humanities librarian. I work with the English and film departments.
Thanks, Pauline. All right, so some housekeeping before we get started. Please ensure you're muted, and if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat. We will be covering a lot of information in the first hour, but we'll leave some time for Q&A. And we'll also stay on for an additional half an hour for any further questions and to help you find specific items. Also, this session will be recorded and will be shared with all participants. I'd like to take a moment to go over what we hope you'll get from this session today. First thing is that there's still a lot of misunderstandings about what open educational resources are. We'll go over some of these myths and misconceptions that we've come across most often in our outreach to faculty. Next, we'll discuss how important it is to first identify what your needs are so you can be more efficient in your search for OERs. Having this understanding before you start your search will save you time and likely a lot of frustration. A large part of this session today will focus on all the different sites you can use to find OERs. Yes, you can do a Google search, but these websites will be in your results. So I'm going to show you which ones you might want to start with based on the type of OERs you're looking for. Once you've found an OER or a selection of OERs, you'll want to evaluate them using a framework based on your needs. We'll go over some aspects of OERs you'll want to think about initially, more complex frameworks for evaluation. Ultimately, we want you to know that librarians are here to help, and there are also vibrant communities that can help. A few examples are linked below. So what I'd like to do is run a poll just to get an idea of what is bringing you to the workshop today. So I'll give everyone a minute or two to go ahead and answer this poll. So it is a multiple choice poll, so you can choose any and all answers that apply to you. If you do choose the last option, please share more information with us in the chat. All right, it looks like almost everyone has voted. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So we are, we're pretty evenly split with a little bit more for librarians and people in ed tech, which isn't surprising. But I'm excited to see how many of you want to incorporate OERs into your course and have been trying to find open educational resources. So thank you everyone for that. So now on to what exactly are open educational resources? I think it's important that we all start at the same point of understanding. So this is the simplest definition I found, and it's been provided by Spark, who are leaders nationally and internationally in everything open education. According to Spark, OERs are teaching, learning, and research resources that are free of cost and access barriers, which also carry legal permission for open use. So note that OERs can be any type of resource. They're not just textbooks. They can include lesson plans, entire courses, multimedia, images, and much more. The free of cost and access barriers has been a huge issue for us since the pandemic began. At the University of Rochester, we have widely used course reserve service when we provide physical course materials to students, which they can check out for 1 or 2 hours at a time. We can no longer provide this service since most of our students are not on campus, and even for those who are, our materials are being quarantined for 6 days at a time when they're returned. Additionally, the financial aid that students have received, they never include the costs of textbooks. So we've been in touch with many students whose families have been seriously financially impacted by the coronavirus. When it comes to permissions for open use, one of the most common methods of licensing OERs used in the States is Creative Commons, which Eileen will go into a little further later in this session. So let's move into common misconceptions about open educational resources. When it comes to OERs, you need to find a substitution for an existing text, not just find a zero-cost version of that same text. Chances are, if you come across a free version of a textbook online, especially through a website like LibGen, it is a pirated version of that textbook. So what about an anthology or a course pack? Combining multiple resources like this chapter from an OER textbook, the picture on the right, or I'm sorry, on the left, and a film, which is the picture on the right, can function much like an anthology. It's pretty clear that legally, you shouldn't just scan a bunch of the Norton Anthology of American Literature and put it in your Blackboard or Canvas or Moodle course. There are those who make those arguments, and in COVID times, a lot of instructors and libraries have been pushing to move those boundary lines. I'm personally in favor of pushing hard on these boundaries, but let's stay within the not so gray areas right now. It is more work to find individual resources and bring them together, but you might find something like the RIT Iroquois Creation Film Project that has 2 minutes online, but a full DVD for more content. Another issue I've come across again and again is the conflation of OER and open access. For many, this might be a small nuance that doesn't really matter, especially if your only concern is getting free access to materials. However, if you want to take advantage of everything that using OER materials can offer, this is a really important difference. Open access provides the user with free access to the material. Many grant funding institutions, like the NSF and NIH, require researchers to publish their findings in an open access format within so many months of publication of their research. Oftentimes, researchers need to pay article processing charges, or APCs, to a journal publisher to make an article available as open access. So it's really understandable why this idea of open access is at the forefront of the minds of many faculty and instructors who need to publish their research. However, this is not the same thing as making these resources open educational materials. While all OERs are free to access, they are so much more than that. So in addition to the definition of OER I gave earlier, another way to think about OERs is through the 5 Rs. First, you can freely access and retain, keep, or download OERs. There is no time limit or expiration date for these materials. Digital OERs can live on your hard drive or in whatever cloud surface you may use in perpetuity. You can also reuse them in a variety of ways, such as embedding into a website, posting on social media, or using them in a video. You can revise them by adapting, editing, or altering the content itself. You can remix or combine multiple OERs with or without original content to create something new. This can be very useful if you're cobbling together a course pack or even a course textbook. And you can also redistribute and share copies of OERs. So together, the concept of the 5 Rs is really what sets OERs apart from all other educational materials. And once again, are what sets OERs apart from materials that are just available as open access. So there are some pretty obvious reasons why students might prefer OERs to regular textbooks. We've actually been collecting stories from students regarding their experiences with OERs. And this particular video is from a student whose class switched to an OER textbook last year.
Some reasons I think it would be a good idea to switch to free textbooks would be, number one, So students don't have to spend hours searching online on Amazon or eBay for cheaper textbooks than are at the bookstore. Number two, so that students don't fall behind while waiting for their physical textbook to arrive at the beginning of the semester. Number three, so nobody has to decide whether the textbook is worth it or not worth it to them. It can be worth it for everybody, regardless of the money that they have to spend. And number four, so that it just creates a more inclusive learning environment where we can focus on learning the material rather than whether or not we can afford to buy a textbook.
For faculty perspectives, the most obvious answer is that we want to support our students by providing free or low class materials that are easy to access. OERs are also completely customizable and provide equitable access to course materials globally. This has also been a huge issue for us at UR since we have a high international student population who are taking classes from their home countries right now. OERs can also be a doorway to open pedagogy, where students are engaged to become creators of information rather than just consumers. Sidebar here, we always love to hear about these perspectives. So if there's something that we've missed, something you want to share, please feel free to put it in the chat. However, on the flip side, there are definitely some very valid reasons for not using OERs. If you decide to use an OER as a text, there will definitely be some additional labor that's required. OERs take time to find and evaluate, especially for those of you with high teaching loads. There will be all the pains of completing a new prep for a class you're teaching, and there might not be ancillary materials included for the textbook, so that could be even more time and effort that's required. Then there's the question about sustainability. For certain subject areas, the materials might need to be updated when global events happen, like a pandemic, or new discoveries are made, like CRISPR-Cas9. I'd argue that this is a perfect time to incorporate open pedagogy into course. However, if you are interested in learning more about open pedagogy, which is kind of beyond the scope of this workshop today, we'll be linking you to our calendar of upcoming events towards the end of this session. Another potential downside of using OERs is that many, if not most, promotion and tenure committees don't recognize the creation of OERs or give any credit to instructors who incorporate their use. Also, you might worry about who is creating this stuff. As I go through some of the websites to find OERs, I'll share with you which ones are peer-reviewed and how you can find reviews from others. And one last consideration why you might not want to use an OER is that you have access to resources already paid for and licensed by your library. I definitely recommend this as a first step if your main concern is finding accessible and free of cost materials for your students. However, there are definitely some pain points with ebook licensing and access. First, the licenses libraries purchased, which are institutional licenses, they are not the same as those you can purchase personally. So while you can buy a specific ebook for your Kindle, it doesn't necessarily mean that the library can purchase that same title electronically. While we can purchase an ebook license, the levels of access varies and are set by the publisher for each specific title. The screenshot to the right shows the purchase options available for a title that is used by hundreds of public health students each semester at the U of R. You can see here the levels available for purchase are only 1 user and 3 user. Sometimes there's also an unlimited option, but often, and especially for titles that can be used as textbooks, the publisher does not offer this unlimited access. There are ways to work within these confines, and we can definitely talk more about this in the Q&A portion of the session if you're interested. One thing to remember is that librarians are usually on the side of providing as much access as we possibly can to our patrons. If you ever come across accessibility issues for library licensed materials, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to us.
There we are. Hi, Eileen Daly-Boas again, and I'm going to take us into the how do we find things, where do we start? And as a librarian, I know our librarian fans and our librarians out there will say the best part of searching is thinking about that strategy. There are a lot of ways to start. There we are. You could browse and wander the many sites out there, much like you might browse the stacks in a library. But like all research, it's good to have a strategy. First, on the left, are you looking for one resource to satisfy or replace the majority of the content you've been using a paid textbook for? Or like on the right, are you open to gathering materials from a variety of places and putting them together yourself? Many courses are already a blend of materials. You probably created your own content in the form of slide decks, lecture notes, assignment prompts. If you're new to OER, then there might be a particular smaller area or topic that hasn't been working well as you'd like, and that might be a good place to start. And the first part of our strategy is creating keywords and limiters, thinking about what's out there in the world of OER. There's a lot, but there's no one single search or database that's going to link to everything you want. Coming up with that shopping list of terms is a really necessary step. Take a few minutes to consider more than just keywords or topics, but also authors, theories, subject areas, and what kind of formats you might need if you're doing a multimodal, if you'd like some multimodal aspects of your course. Do you need problem sets or exercises? Do you need something that will automatically integrate with your Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, or whatever thing you use for your CMS? And so just like my latest Instacart order, sometimes you have to think about what's replaceable or what you're willing to do yourself to make that quote recipe work for your class. The benefit to OERs is that you have the ability to edit the material and update it as you see fit. Sometimes though, compromise has to look like a quilt. It takes a lot of effort to create any class. It's seldom simple cut and paste or reading a slide deck, or at least good education isn't that way. Creating an engaging, high quality class takes a lot of work, but there are a lot of people willing to help. So I like the metaphor of a quilting bee. There are a lot of people willing to add some stitches to your design, and choosing from the vast array of OER materials, library license materials, and finding affordable versions of text doesn't have to be done in isolation. You've got librarians, your Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, your campus bookstore. They're all invested in helping you have a class that works well together. There we go. So we're going to look at some case studies that aren't just to give us a sense of what does this look like as you're doing it. If you've got an introduction to psychology class on the horizon, you might have a few tentpole items that you need to cover in your shopping list. And while there's always new research you might want to incorporate, there's probably a lot that doesn't change every single year. It's likely to be a pretty big class. So if it can integrate with your CMS, your Blackboard Canvas, that'd probably be great. First-year students often take this course, so you might be thinking if there's student resources that could help new college students develop their study techniques, that would be great. This one is an example from OpenStax. It's the 2020 edition. It's been updated. It's got CMS integration. It's got student resources for studying and note-taking. So this might be a really great place to start. In this next case, this isn't an OER. This is an example of open access, and I just want to use as an example, neuroscience and neuroanatomy. Some of your wish list items might include videos and labs, something that's really up to date. Neuroscience Online and Neuroanatomy Online are labeled as open access educational resources, which means they're accessible, but while there's a lot of up-to-date detail, and it's from a trustworthy source, the University of Texas Medical School at Houston. The videos here aren't fancy. It'll take some time to assess if the old school videos and diagrams in it are good enough. This one does have some supplemental material. The graphics aren't great, as with the expensive textbooks that come with additional components. But the other thing to note is there's no way to download this material and edit it. They've offered materials as access only and no rights to edit it. So it's not OER, and although it's freely available, if for some reason they decide to take it down or stop funding this project, you're out of luck. So I wanted to think about something that's really heavy with materials, but not at all open, which kind of boxes you in. So we'll look at case study 3. Here's an example from a graduate class that has a qualitative research component. Some of the education instructors here at UR think that this is the best book out there for that. But it's not available for licensing by libraries in any way, not even a single user. And while it's not super expensive, it runs about $40. We don't have a print reserves due to COVID, so there aren't many options for financially strapped students. So this example of this book might be a case for doing a deep dive for articles or other books that have elements of what's covered, and then maybe choose the most important single chapter and post that to your Blackboard or Canvas class. This would keep you within the restrictions of copyright. You could also check to see if your institution has other ways to help students in financial straits. And now we're going to talk just a little bit. Let's quote unquote chat. There's 34 of us, so that probably don't open your mics, but take a few moments to think about what your specific needs are. For the next part of this session, we'll be looking at specific websites that you can find OERs in, and it will help for you to have something in mind as we do so. Feel free to share what you might want to look for in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we'll be available for another half hour to answer those specific questions you may have, or to help you with searching. So take a few minutes to, if you have a syllabus handy, if there's a favorite class, take just a couple of minutes to gather those together. And if you want to share those, we'll give you about 2 minutes. Is that right, Stephanie?
Oh, that sounds about right.
I feel like I should have queued up some open music for us to listen to.
Yeah, I should have embedded some audio. All right, so operations management, very interesting.
Nice.
You just listened to an interesting talk about operations management. So even if you don't know specific materials you might be looking for, if there's a course that you have in mind, you know, you can keep it really general for now.
If there's faculty that you've worked with where you know that they're a good bet, that they might be open to it, you might be thinking about that. Ooh.
Doses calculation. Okay, very interesting. There are a lot of nursing OERs out there, so.
Yeah, nursing education is, they do a lot. There's a lot out there. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe a little bit more professional development for stuff like InDesign and Photoshop. Great stuff. Okay, so let's move on into, let's do some searching. Okay, so we're going to start with OER textbooks. And one of the first ones, and I think Eileen used it in one of her examples, is OpenStax. So this is peer reviewed. It is great for introductory courses. There are a variety of student and instructor resources that are included, and it has just over 40 textbooks. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And let me make this bigger because I have this on my big screen. How does that look? Is that good? Is that too big? Okay. All right. So with OpenStax, there aren't a ton of textbooks. So I wouldn't really recommend searching. I would just do just browse through the subjects to see what they have. So for this, I am going to take a look at science. And sorry, there's a lot of pop-ups here. As I scroll down, I can see that there are a bunch. There's 8, there's over about 20 resources, so a few in a different language. And you can see here that there's also some items for AP courses as well as high school. So that video that I posted earlier about the students' perspectives, the class that she was talking about, the anatomy and physiology textbook here from OpenStax is the one that her class ended up using instead. And that was a class of over 120 students that's taught at least once every semester. So the cost savings gets into the thousands very quickly for students when a change like that is made. All right, close that. Let's move on to LibreText, which is a little bit similar to OpenStax. They are a little bit more interactive. They're very easily editable. I'll show you that when we get into the site. You can embed them into your LMS. And LibreText has a bit more options. There's over 300 textbooks that are there right now. And what I've included here too is this, there was a series of workshops that they put on in November called LibreFest. And so I've linked you directly to those YouTube videos, which are pretty amazing what they're doing in LibreText. All right, so look here. So for this one, I'm going to go into Explore the Libraries. And this time I'm going to take a look at what they have for mathematics. What's interesting about LibreText and the way that they have kind of organized their website is that there are bookshelves where they have all of their kind of curated LibreText open educational textbooks that you can access here, but then you can also go into courses. So I'll show you what that is. It's easier to show you than tell you. So what these are resources that specific colleges have taken, and maybe they've changed them a little bit. And then they can have their students access them through these like kind of mini sites. So let's take a look at Monroe Community College, which for those of you in Rochester or in New York State, maybe you're aware, MCC is our local community college here. And it's really great to see just how many open educational textbooks they're using for math. So you can see that there are at least 7 different classes. There are some supplements that are included. So it's just like a really cool way to organize materials for yourself as an institution, for your students, so they can access this information. Yeah, I just think it's really interesting. And when it comes to editing them, there is the remixer, which allows you to edit them directly in the website, which is kind of nice. You can also edit it in other ways, but this isn't a creating OER workshop, so we're going to move on. All right. So the next one is Open Textbook Library. And this is also peer reviewed. What I really like about this are the reviewable ratings, and I'll go into those in a minute. This is really great for upper level and graduate courses as well. So some of you who posted about like nursing or things like that, you know, this might be a good resource for you. There are over 800 textbooks there right now. And for the sake of this, I am going to browse again. And this time I'm going to go into medicine. I know we have some other people who are on this session from our medical center that's associated with the University of Rochester. So this could be of interest for you all. So nursing pharmacology. As I scroll down, we can see more textbooks, even massage therapy, which is interesting. So I'm going to stop on this lab guide to clinical hematology, and we can see that there are 5 reviews. I really like this interface. It's just really easy to read and see what's going on. So you can see the entire table of contents, the formats that are available, so online PDF and ebook, which is really great. The conditions of use is like right out there, so you know that this is Eileen's going to get into what this means in a little bit, but this is an OER. And then there are reviews, reviews are one of the best things to check out. And I always like to look at the ones, the lowest review I can find. So for this, let's take a look at this 4-star review. Read more. So we can see that that open textbooks really provides a, not to be repetitive, but a comprehensive system for reviewing their textbooks with all of these different things that you might want to consider when looking at the book. So it's really coming up with that evaluation framework for you, so you don't have to think about these things on your own. So yeah, this is one of the things that I like the most about open textbooks. All right, close that out. Now let's move on to finding not textbooks, but open access books and public domain books, which the database of open access books is one of the largest ones. This is all academic and peer-reviewed books that are provided by publishers. Authors do not, this isn't like an author repository. It has to be submitted by the publisher. But all of these are just open access. And the specific rights do vary by title, so that's just something to be aware of. So open access, not OER. But, if you are looking for a textbook replacement or substitution, you can search by title. You can also browse. What I recommend is by subject. And you can kind of drill down from there to see if there is something that might be of interest to you. All right, and then when it comes to public domain books, we have HathiTrust and Project Gutenberg, but these are very different from each other. So HathiTrust is, it's a huge archive of historical and archival materials. There's more than 8 million titles and artifacts that have been digitized. But a lot of these are under copyright, so that's just something to keep in mind. Members can get special access to these materials, but a lot of times that depends on your physical holdings. So the way it works is like what's in your physical holdings, you might be able to get access electronically to what's in HathiTrust. It can be a little confusing. If you have any questions about HathiTrust, you can always contact your librarian. But what it can serve as is a great discovery tool for finding things that you can then maybe order through interlibrary loan if you don't have access to that material. And then there's Project Gutenberg, which is it's really awesome, especially for our humanities folks, anybody in history. There's over 60,000 ebooks. It's one of the oldest, it is the oldest digital repository, I believe. And what I love about it is that it's compatible with e-readers as well. So I'll just kind of show you what that looks like. Let's take a look at one of these. So you can see all these different options. You can download EPUBs, you can download Kindle files with images, without, plain text. And then Eileen pointed this out to me earlier, which I don't know why I've missed, but students can scan this QR code and get the book on their phone. So it's just, yeah, it's really cool. I love Project Gutenberg. All right, so moving on. Then there's also multimedia. I'll go through this pretty quick because I'm not sure if anybody was specifically interested in multimedia. But this website, Open Oregon Education Materials, Educational Resources, is a great site with access to, it's almost like a referatory to other sites that have open images that you can use. So there's a huge listing here. As I go down, what's really cool is that there's disabled in here sites, images of empowerment. So talking about, trying to have like diverse and inclusive images, really important. As I scroll down a little bit, like Unsplash, this is one of my personal favorites. I actually have a few photos that I've used from Unsplash in this presentation. And then, of course, there's Google image search, which is always helpful to know how to use. And they've recently, I'm not sure how long ago, updated their usage rights filter so that it's just like Creative Commons or not Creative Commons. So like stuff that's more commercial. So you can easily filter out, filter for things that are open that you can then manipulate and change as you want. All right. There is the Free Music Archive. If you are interested in finding music that is either royalty free, or you can search for Creative Commons music within here. And then there's also YouTube, which let's open this up and, oh, okay. Apparently my browser is up to date. All right, so I'm gonna do just a quick search for, let's see, Vox Pop videos. So that's like voice of the people, which is kind of a fun thing to look at. But if I go to this filter for my search results, I can then go into Creative Commons, choose that, and then all of these videos that appear with Creative Commons licenses, you might have to investigate further to see exactly what license they have. But you know, chances are they could be an OER that you can then manipulate and edit and do what you will with. All right. Okay, so next, repositories and referatories. So one of the largest ones is OER Commons, which is really like K through 20 and adult learners. So I think that there were some people that were interested in finding that type of material for adult learners. This could be something you might want to take a look at. For the sake of this example right here, I'm going to look for American Sign Language and see what kind of results I get. So I can see I get 15 results. I can filter for education level. So I'm interested in maybe like lower division classes. And as I scroll down, I can see that there are some full courses that are available, which is very cool. And it's nice that they really kind of lay out what this means as far as the licensing. And yeah, all right. I can do additional filters by material type, more specifically by license type. So there's definitely a lot of options with OER Commons. Going to go into Merlot next. And Merlot has even more stuff that you can find. So let's do another search for American Sign Language. And you can just see immediately how different the kind of user interface is for this. So we have the Merlot collection, we have other libraries, we have the web. It can be a little overwhelming. There's a lot of information in here. But what I like about it are all of these boxes that you can choose like multiple things very easily. So you can filter in and see exactly what your results would be. So for ASL, I'm getting a lot more than those, you know, I think it was 15. And what's nice is that it really shows the material type and how many things are in those material types. All right. Sorry, I'm going through this kind of fast, but we do have time at the end where we can explore these a little bit more individually. And then this is Oasis, which I love the user interface with this. I think it is just, it's really simple and easy and clear. I can look for textbooks, courses. What I think is really cool is interactive simulations. Going back to like maybe our neurology people, you know, if you're looking for this kind of information, people who might be into like genetics, to be able to see kind of specific simulations that you might want to include in your course materials, your slides. They have that information here. Audio textbooks, open access, like there's just so much that's in here. So I'm going to do another search for American Sign Language. And we can see immediately I don't get as many results, but it's also not as overwhelming. So that's just something to keep in mind. Sometimes it's easier to start with something that's a little bit more focused. And if you have trouble, then you can expand from there. All right. All right. I think Eileen is up next.
Hi, so I need to start by saying that I am not a lawyer. I cannot provide legal advice, and nothing about this should be considered legal advice regarding copyright and use of materials. But I think talking just a little bit about Creative Commons licenses at this point, where maybe your head is swimming a little bit, it's just good to get a grounding in that. So next slide. There we go. So CC0 is for works in the public domain according to the laws of whichever country the work originates from. Project Gutenberg is a great example of a repository of public domain works. But CC0 can also be assigned to new works where the author wishes to waive all author rights, including those of attribution. CC BY requires that if anyone shares, revises, reuses this work, they must credit the author. This is a pretty common license for OERs, although some argue that CC0 is the way to go if you're creating things to put out there as much as possible. In the world of academia, I think it's important, sorry, Stephanie. In the world of academia, I think it's really important to remember that the rules that academia have are different than the rules that sort of just Creative Commons licenses has. It's standard practice to cite our sources. So while the license might not require attribution, you might consider including it in your citations, in your creation, because of the environment, the sort of the water that we're swimming in. Or if you're doing an open pedagogy project and your students are going to be using that, please, right, encourage them to cite folks. The CC BY share alike, it requires that if anyone else shares the work, they must license the new creation under the identical term. So you couldn't find something, say a textbook with the CC BY share alike license, make some changes, and then share it using a CC0 license. You can't, it pulls those restrictions along with every sort of child of it. So that's a good one to keep an eye out for. The CC BY no derivatives means that the work must be shared as is and can't be changed in any way. These works would not be open educational resources since they can't be revised or remixed. That doesn't mean that they might not be helpful, but that you can't edit them. That's a lot like the one I showed earlier with neuroscience. And then there's the non-commercial license, which prohibits commercial use of materials. Now, remembering licenses like these can be combined. So you could have a CC license that required attribution, share alike, and also be limited to non-commercial purposes. So getting a handle on what those are, if you're new to the world of OER and CC licenses, you're going to have to come back a few dozen times, but there are lots of really good groups that will help you figure that out. Again, not providing legal support. So evaluating OERs. So remember, we started thinking about our search, thinking about what we're looking for. When it comes to determining whether you'll use an OER in your course or how you'll use it, deciding what your evaluation criteria is before you begin your research can save you a lot of time. This graphic is a good starting point for what you might want to consider. Relevance is the most obvious, but you should consider accessibility in terms of ADA compliance and user experience or usability. You'll want to know how accurate the material is, especially if the resource isn't peer reviewed. You'll want to ensure that you understand exactly what kind of licensing the materials are under. And if you'd like to see a much more detailed rubric, you can go to this bit.ly link, which will be placed in the chat. Now, don't worry about this. I'm not going to read it, I promise. This is just a quick example of what a really full-fledged rubric, this is the one that is linked by the bit.ly, that it might look like. Weighting how much each element is worth is up to you. Let's look at a target example, a little more targeted about how you might think about a particular source. So here's a simplified example. You can see why it's important, again, to start with a strong sense of what you need before you begin searching. You only want to take the time to do a full evaluation when you're sure you found the best of what's out there. Using strategies for finding the best OER for your class can make the evaluating part less onerous. So here's a good example of, I really care about the course objectives, about assessment and additional materials, and adaptability. And so instead of saying pros and cons, it's what's easy and what's going to need some work. As Stephanie said, like, we're thinking about your labor is a real thing. And so looking with an eye to that can be really helpful. And it's going to be different for every person. And so in thinking about this, going in with, this is thinking about what you're looking for, starting small, maybe it's just a section, and then working out, but having in mind what those licenses do as you work through. One of the next things I think we're going to say is, that's what we have for our content. But what we would like to do is to remind you that there's centers for learning and teaching. There's bookstores which actually are invested in having lower costs, even though they don't seem like it. And I think, Stephanie, I think that's it, right?
That is. All right.
So now here's the question time. If you've got questions, if you'd like to speak, you can always just put, I have a question in the chat and we can call on you. That might be the easiest. And we'd love it if you took the survey link, just so we can be better and better at this.
So if any of that discussion of Creative Commons licensing, I think Moriana is in attendance today. She is going to be putting on this workshop this Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. If you want to learn more about Creative Commons licensing, she is going to provide an awesome presentation. And then we also have an author series kind of around this Open Pedagogy Approaches book, which really talks about the partnerships between librarians and students and faculty in using open pedagogy to really engage students and have a transformative learning experience. So, all right. Any questions? Okay, it looks like Deidre has a question.
Actually, I did, but I think you answered it.
Okay.
It was more about getting more information about the licensing piece, and I think you just mentioned that Friday there'll be a workshop. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, this Friday, and the link to those workshops has been posted in chat. So this is kind of a link to all of the workshops, and it should be probably like the first one that will appear in that list.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm sorry, because I think I had put my sort of raised my hand right as you were giving that information.
Not a problem at all.
It's great. That's Kismet. We like that.
Yeah, that we planned that correctly.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So yes, we will definitely, this presentation has been recorded. We will be sharing out the recording. We will be sharing out the slides. We will be slapping a Creative Commons license on them so that you can go ahead and reuse them as you want to, or edit them, remix them, all those arts.
If you do remix it, and we would love it if you shared back with us, so we can improve ours as well. We would love to see what others are doing.
Absolutely. Okay, so a question from Sarah. Without financial incentives or institutional recognition, why does anyone make OERs? So that's a good question. And one that I think probably just varies person to person. I think a lot of institutions are providing some, like, maybe, not huge financial incentives, but maybe small grants to develop full textbook OERs. That's definitely something that's been going on.
I'm going to jump in. This is Eileen. In some cases, it's because there's a gap and it's not being solved by textbooks or just by recognizing that there are some universities, right? There's 400 students taking an intro to something class, and it's an open secret that students don't buy the textbook. And so, so some professors, just in order to have better results, want to go open. So some professors, knowing that students are like, they might say, the students will figure it out. It gets better results. So I used to teach at Geneseo for a while. And one of the things I found is the more that the students had access to the books, the better they did.
Yeah, and Kim makes a good point in the chat that faculty pressure on promotion and tenure could, that could have a big impact if eventually, use, creation of open educational resources, if that's considered in the promotion and tenure process, maybe we will see a sea change when it comes to that. Academia can be so supportive when it comes to diversity and inclusion and global engagement and all of these things, broader impacts. If you've ever written a grant, it's important, and making resources available openly as open educational resources can make a huge impact.
And to, I think it was Mark's question, one of with students insist they do better reading printed books. There are a lot, including the Open Pedagogy Approaches book that's going through Pressbooks, which makes a really low cost printable version that students can order. So that way, by going open, if students are like, well, wait, now I don't have a textbook, that for a small cost, that can get printed up. And it's something that the library would have the right to print up, bind up, and put on hold or on reserve for students if they wanted to.
Yeah, and I think that there's also partnerships with the bookstores too, but once again, that's going to be very dependent on the institution.
Yeah, and Mark, that's a great question though, because I think, right, there's some misconceptions. There's things that used to be true that aren't true anymore. And so just bringing it up, one of the things we found with some of our students that they were saying, if going into a class that it's got an open or a free textbook, they're more likely to take that class. And that does translate into professors saying, wait a minute, why did Professor X's class fill up and me, Professor Y, it didn't? That can be like, instructors aren't all about popularity, but it kind of hurts if people aren't going to take your class, not because of anything other than cash. So, but that's a real concern, especially these days. We're going to see a lot of students whose families have felt there's going to be a long tail to the impact of COVID. So yes, thanks, Joanne. I think thinking about our role and universities and colleges' role in terms of us, without being too political, being places for equity, and not ivory castles, but places of equality, where you don't necessarily you can get the education. I think it's going to be huge. So Kim Hoffman, who's here, is one of the co-editors. There's a bunch of us who played smaller roles for the Open Pedagogy Approaches book. For me, I also know the fact that my university was generous enough to say, yep, we'll pay you as a librarian to help create this, is a really, I think that's a good step for colleges and universities to help fund researchers to do this work. And so getting a course release, sometimes maybe it's not promotion and tenure, but maybe a course release. I know my friend teaches at Center College, and they did some interesting things in terms of how they could maybe not pay you to do it. Maybe it wasn't promotion and tenure, but even something such as a course release can happen. And so that's our time, but Stephanie and I, and maybe some of our colleagues, we're going to stick around. If you've got questions and you'd like to workshop some things, if you'd like to go grab that chat and, start searching, we're just going to hang out and see if we can help. And if you've got further questions, that'd be great.
There's one more question in the chat.
Okay.
OER is the step before creating the internationally accessible digital library.
My short answer is yes. I wish so Lindsay Kronk is our collection head of collections, and she's amazing. And she's pushed really hard for it's called the accessible it's called the ACT commitment. The
ACT commitment.
Yes. What does it stand for?
I think it's
Affordable textbooks.
accessible course texts.
There we are.
Or whichever A.
Sorry, acronyms are not my strong suit. I don't know why I went into library science. Marianne?
Just to add to that question, that the UNESCO, the worldwide organization in support of education, it has been working to support OERs for many, many years. So they have excellent documentation. They have programs. They have even support for people. So I do believe that there is an international movement towards open educational resources, and we are just adding to that.
Okay. So Jean Peterson, hi Jean, had a question. So I'm thinking about having my students build a course book and or anthology of course readings. What kind of platform would I use? Where would we save and store the results of our work? So that can be a little bit of a complicated question, Jean. And what I would suggest is that maybe, and I can share Emily's information with you, but we might need to touch base with a digital scholarship lab to see how like the different ways that we can think about doing something like that, whether it is just using Blackboard or whether we want to create a WordPress site for this, what the implications are if you want to kind of make this as a resource that's openly accessible to others outside of the institution. There's a lot of things to think about. So we could definitely speak more with you about that and maybe touch base with Emily Sherwood. Marianne?
I can also speak a little bit about that if you are interested. Some of the most used platform is Pressbooks. Sadly, we do not have an instance at the University of Rochester, but you can pay some money. Is not very expensive. You can get a free account. But the results had watermarks, and if you pay it's not very expensive, then you get a book without watermarks if you use the cloud-based Pressbooks. LibreText is also an option that you could use, and that one is completely free. And of course, as my colleague says, there are a lot of other platforms that you could use, but those are the two most common.
Right. I'd say it definitely depends on what your end goal is if you want to make this openly accessible to others or have it be like an iterative instance that you're just using within your class.
I will jump in as the not a lawyer with moment, but FERPA means you can't demand that your students publish at all on the open web under their own names. So it's just one of those things to negotiate. It could be that if students know going in, and it's a question of awareness. Are you willing to put this out there? And many times students are, because instead of having a disposable assignment, they're actually creating something. And then after that, the students are working with things that other students have created and pulling together. And it can be really exciting. But I will say, not a lawyer, but FERPA, it comes into play here.
Actually, Mariana and I recently worked on a class with a professor who one of the optional projects for their final was to create a sort of archive of 2020, of the pandemic, where they would interview, their friends and family, and people how to talk about how they were affected by the pandemic. And like one of the sort of issues that we ran into is like, how do we share this in a way that's kind of respectful to all of the people that participated? So we ended up talking a lot about sort of getting permission and copyright and things like that. But it turned out to be a really interesting project.
Yeah, I'm working with a graduate class in the Warner School of Education, where they've done oral history and oral interviews with students in the Beechwood community, or people in the Beechwood community in Rochester. And right now they're kind of keeping it closed because they're not sure what it's going to be, but she's going to do it every year because it's a community engaged class. It's learning how to understand the educational environment of adolescence. So yeah, having those conversations, they're not hard to have. They're just and sometimes they're really helpful to have with the students. But thinking about what are their requirements, are there media releases, things like that, that you just might want to think about ahead of time, depending on how open you want it to be. So, but it can also be something that students put on a CV or a resume that's going to set them apart from a lot of other people if they've been able to do this in class. Even if, right, Jean gets a lot of music majors, being able to say, I participated in this kind of activity shows a breadth of flexibility and knowledge that can be really useful. So.
Any other questions? Anyone want some assistance finding specific materials or suggestions? So if there are no further questions, we can call this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you would just, if you're searching right now and you're like, I'll let those folks talk in the corner, like, it's fine. Just put something in the chat that says, Eileen and Stephanie hang out, and we are happy to. So, I've got this blocked off and a martini waiting for me afterwards. So
that sounds good, Eileen. I'll join or in spirit.
I see what you did there. Oops. Sorry. I see what you did there. Set off my Siri. That's great.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.